Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. A little bit of background on this particular topic. In April 2nd of 2012 of last year, the council adopted its fiscal FY 2013 goals. One of the goals that was adopted included a statement to develop improvement plans for the beautification of public right-of-way at city entrances by 2014. In support of that goal, in the FY13 budget process, the council did appropriate $35,000 within the Community Development Department's professional services line item for civil and landscape architect design services to support that individual goal and the design components that may come along with that project. We are now beginning to develop the project scope and really here to talk with the council about the council's expectations and ideas, share some of the thoughts that staff has had in approaching the project and make sure that we scope the project from the beginning appropriately to meet the council's goals and objectives and maybe suggest some other considerations as part of that effort. Just to provide a little bit of background in, I guess, the recent history on the topic of beautification, most of the efforts that have happened in the course of the last 15 years or so occurred between 1998 and 2000. In July of 1998, there was a city volunteer cleanup effort that took place on the north entry of the city, which resulted in removal of a number of pounds of materials, inert materials, and tires from a property on the north entry. And then that was followed with the installation of the current Welcome to City Moscow Entryway signs that were installed over the course of 1999, 2000, and I think actually early in 2001, where the current signs were installed on the west, north, and east entryways into the city. The south sign was delayed because the US 95 project was on the planning horizon, and it was uncertain where that highway would end up being constructed. And the city did not want to, I think, waste the effort of the installation until that had been identified. Since that time, there really has not been significant efforts, at least not that I'm aware of, related to kind of the beautification of the city entryways or the corridors. And I think thus was the generation of the goal from the council. As staff understands it, we believe the council's goal is to develop a plan to improve the perceived aesthetic appearance of the city's entryways. As part of that, we need to identify the specific areas of study that we're going to be looking at so that we can ensure that we are addressing the council's desires and we can adequately address that aspect. Certainly is, I think, from staff's perspective, it's important to examine or consider the appearance of the city entryways also from the perspective of roadway corridors. The actual city entry point may be one location, and in some instances we have our city entry signs a couple hundred feet within the city corporate limits. On the north entrance we have it a quarter mile outside the city limits. And so defining where is the city entryway and the area that is under consideration is important. Are those discrete individual locations where you cross the city limit boundary, or where it was convenient, where there's a location that's available for the city entryway sign, or is it more of a continuous transition from the rural setting outside of the community into the more urbanized area? And I guess from the perspective of staff, if the aesthetic quality of a corridor is not maintained beyond an entryway effort, so you can make a great deal of investment and effort just in the discrete location moving into the community, but if you're not making other efforts to improve the appearances and beautify the community, that you are diminishing maybe the effectiveness of a concentrated effort in a discrete location. Staff is suggesting as part of this that the project could include the approach on the project could include the consideration of these roadways as corridors with a phasing design effort where certain aspects, if there are certain entryway areas that are more importance and more focus for the council, that we can begin our efforts in those in a more concentrated fashion. And as I mentioned before, this is a map of the current city limits. The blue plus signs indicate the current location of the city entryway signs, because you can see that on the east side that sign is actually located some distance east of the city limits. On the north, it's located inside city limits a little distance, and on the west is the same. As you kind of look at the roadway corridors, and we transition from a fairly rural highway section into an urbanized highway section that tends to be in vehicle-oriented commercial district until you reach the downtown core. So there are various points of transitions as you're moving from the outside undeveloped rural areas of the community into the more developed areas. And so you transition at points, and these symbols on the map are just used to denote various locations where you cross either the city limit boundaries and into the more urbanized area of the community, or where you transition from the more highway-oriented development into the more city center focus. And then there are also gateway elements where you transition from the community into the University of Idaho campus. So all of these elements, or all these locations, are really transition points from different characters of community of development, or different characters of development around the area, on the highway corridors to the urbanized core to the University of Idaho campus. In looking at scoping the project, staff believes that the aesthetic quality of any roadway is really a composite of many individual components. The first of which is, what's the condition of the roadway itself? Is it in good repair? Is it cracked? Is it damaged? Is it potholed? Is it clean and well striped? Is the striping in good condition? Is it free of debris? So really looking at the condition of the roadway itself. Moving to the condition of the edge of the roadway. Is there curbing? Are there sidewalks? Are there tree lawns? Are there street trees? What's the overall condition? Is it well maintained? You then look at the street signage and lighting. So a street signage, is it in good condition, good repair? Is it faded? Is it damaged? And how is the street lighting in individual area? And then there are other public amenities you may look to consider. Are there public art installations? Are there visitor wayfinding signage and other elements that could be incorporated within those roadway corridors? Also in consideration, many of these corridors, we look at the utility facilities. Are there overhead utilities that cause visual clutter? Are there a number of utility poles, overhead cables, guy wires, and other things that can lead to visual clutter? And then as moving kind of beyond that, at the edge of the right-of-way condition, how well maintained is it? Is it weedy? Is it overgrown? Are there grass areas that are not well maintained? Are the ditch lines in good repair? Are they narrow? Are they wider, mowed, and more well maintained? As we move out of the actual adjacent right-of-way and onto adjacent private property, we start to obviously begin to look at the adjacent private signage, the quality, the quantity, the size, the type of signage that's present on the highway corridor, and then we kind of shift into the adjacent land uses, or the appropriate land uses, and then move into the adjacent site development. The parking lot, is it well landscaped? Are there buffer landscaped areas adjacent between the right-of-way and the private development? And then finally, the placement, design, and condition of adjacent structures to that right-of-way. So all of those, as you kind of visually think about a roadway corridor, those are all the different things that you are really looking at and interacting with in assessing kind of the aesthetic condition or quality of an individual roadway corridor. As staff has kind of looked at the project, and we considered whether this was something that should be just a staff-led project or something that would involve the broader stakeholder group within the community, and certainly we felt that the latter was most appropriate with this, that there could be a fairly reasonably small stakeholder steering committee group that could be formed that could help provide guidance and direction in the project. That can include representatives of the City Council, from the Idaho Transportation Department, that is the agency that has a jurisdiction over most of the roadways we'll be considering as part of a city entryway beautification effort. Potentially it could include representatives from Latah County. Some of these areas may exist or reside, or some of these situations that the community may wish to address may reside outside of the city limits. Certainly Chamber of Commerce and the business community that's very present on these roadway corridors, and you could have potentially a corridor business owner, a property owner, possibly a Planning and Zoning Commission member, a Transportation Commission member, and it might also be helpful to have somebody who is a local design professional that might provide some input and guidance with the committee's efforts. So this was just a general concept of what could be a steering committee that could steer the project, could consider the condition of the existing corridors, look at areas that they think improvements could be made, identify areas within the right-of-way where that landscaping or curbing or sidewalk or other improvements could be installed, and provide recommendations for the council's consideration. The council, in looking at the professional services, like I mentioned before, previously there are $35,000 for civil and landscape design services that have been budgeted for this year. That certainly isn't going to make it very far in the concept of developing an overall project plan. So staff anticipate that the services would be used for targeted design efforts. So the committee, led and assisted by staff, would kind of work through the general concept of defining the geographic areas under consideration, looking at the conditions of all the elements that staff had identified on the list, decide what areas they thought were appropriate to address, look at areas where there may be locations of excess right-of-way where landscaping could occur, and then would work with the staff and the committee to prioritize those areas, and then the design efforts could be focused on those individual areas where the committee felt were the highest priority and would generate the greatest benefit to the community. And there are other aspects, companion components of this that could go along with it. With the chamber, could work with adjacent businesses within along these corridors and look at other right-of-way improvements or landscape beautification efforts that they could encourage some of the business to participate in the program as well. We would do a traditional request for qualifications for professional design services, and then we would just control the effort of the consultant on a task order basis to try to manage the overall cost and have staff carry most of the project administration. As we looked at kind of general project schedule, typically between the advertisement period and the proposal reviews and selection and contract negotiation, it typically is about a 6-week process to go through the request for qualifications process. During that time period, we could work on the formation of the steering committee and develop some of the background project mapping and data collection. And then that would lead us probably to a project kicked off somewhere near the mid-April to late April time frame. And I anticipate that the project would be somewhere near a 4 to 5 month effort to complete with a final report and presentation that could come to the council sometime either in September or October of this year. Right at this point in time, staff's looking for input and direction from the council. We want to make sure that we do approach the project in a manner that is consistent with what the council was hoping to achieve. And I'd like to try to answer any questions that the council might have.
Thank you, Bill. Council, questions for Bill? Hand up. Yes, Walter.
Thank you, ma'am. If I'm not mistaken in my memory, the statement in the CCSR and in the memo, Bill, that you wrote to the administrative committee, you state that on April 2, 2012, the Moscow City Council adopted the council's goals for the 2013 fiscal year. That was done during a council goal setting that was my words, a cleanup goal setting process. And I believe this original goal was done in 2011, if that was the year that we met up at the 1912 Center.
I'll have to see if that...
It's not pertinent to my point, but just to make sure you understand what I'm building this around. And
it's not new.
Further, my memory is that I made the original proposal for the goal, and I am pretty certain that the words public right-of-way were not included in the original goal statement that was adopted in 2011. It morphed somehow, I think, in 2012 to add public right-of-way, and that's where my memory fails me. I don't remember what, if any, protestations I may have made at the time to restrict it to public right-of-way. Now, I do notice that in your memo, under defining elements to be considered, you make the statement that, quote, while the council's goals focused on the beautification of public right-of-way, unquote, there may be elements that the city may wish to consider within the project that extend beyond the public right-of-way and which may have significant impact upon the aesthetics of the area, unquote. That is the statement that really encapsulates the original intent of the goal that I believe I was the one that put forward.
Sue?
I think what got morphed was I had a request for street trees to go up to D Street and up the hill north so that we'd have a perception of an extended downtown. And my street trees got combined with beautifying entrances, and this is a lot bigger than what I had in mind.
If I might, there are two separate goals.
That's right.
Yeah.
There are two different discrete goals. One is the city entryway beautification, and one was expanding the perceived Main Street downtown area north. Those are two separate that were both adopted in 2012.
Okay.
So they are really two different projects.
But
Although
complementary.
there's overlap in certain sections.